Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. No, really. This is the fifth part of a multi-part series on building a podcast client app with Xamarin Forms. In part 4, we created a detail page that shows the episode information, including the guests, and also lets the user play and stop. In this episode, we're going to build a suite of functionality around the playing of the podcast itself. That includes buttons for play, stop, and pause, and also buttons that let you skip backwards or forwards by 10 seconds. And that's all coming right up on the .NET Show. So this is where we left it last time. Right now, we've got a home page which shows the first 20 episodes of the podcast. We call them shows. And the user can load more episodes. And if you go to episode details, you can see the guest information and all the other information. And you can play. And you can stop. Okay? But the user can only play and stop. There's no pause function, nor is there a way to scrub or, jump to a specific location. So in this episode, we're going to provide controls for play, pause, resume, and stop. We're also going to have a slider so that we can scrub our way through. And we'll also have some controls to rewind and fast forward by 10 seconds. So the first thing we need to do is add some media buttons. Now, I went looking out on the internet, and I found this at pixabay.com. This is a PNG file that has, all of these button PNGs in a single PNG. In other words, this is just one PNG with all these images in it. And the reason that I like this is because of this. It's free for commercial use, no attribution required, and now all I really had to do was write some code to load up this thing and, from different rectangles, create new bitmaps and then save them as PNG files. Well, I ended up doing that. So if you go out to my repo and go into Mobile DNR5 media icons, you'll see them all here. I have separated them out for you. So the first thing we need to do is we don't need this guy nor the note. We need all of these individual graphics plus thumb, and we need to copy them to a couple of places. Over here in Resources Drawable, where all the icons are, copy them there. That's in the Android project. In the iOS project, just under Resources, copy them there. Now, these should be self-explanatory, but the thumb is going to be for our slider. I don't like the default thumb that you get and it's different for each platform. So the slider has the ability to use your own graphic. So I actually have the console app that I wrote to chop all those PNG files out, and that's in the repo as well. So the first thing we're going to do is replace the play and stop buttons in the detail page. So we'll go to the detail page. And you can see right here we've got this button for play and this button for stop. So we're going to take those out and replace it with this. So this is a horizontal stack layout. And I've got two image buttons. An image button is just what you think it is. It's a button that you can load an image into. And here I'm loading play. Here I'm loading stop. You have to set the width request to change the width, which also changes the height because they're square. So width request is 50. I set the background color to white because I noticed they had little bits of gray poking out of the corners. So I also changed the binding of is visible to is enabled. So rather than showing one button at a time, either play or pause, but I'm going to disable them or enable them according to is playing. And so if we're not playing, because we have the inverse bool converter, if is playing is false, then is enabled will be true for play. And isEnabled will be true for stop if we are playing. And everything else is pretty much the same. So let's just run it and see how it looks here. All right, go to the episode details. And yeah, okay. So this one is actually disabled, but it doesn't look disabled. Worse is when I click on it, you see those flashes right there? It happens with the play button too. Now, play is disabled, so I won't be able to do that, but now I can stop. And yeah, this flashing, believe me, I looked to see if there was a fix for that, and there really isn't. So after looking around on the internet, I came to the conclusion image button isn't going to work. So what we're going to do instead is use a regular image control with a gesture recognizer to handle the click. Turns out we can use our existing commands too. So one thing that I'd like to do is change the opacity of the button based on whether it's enabled or not. Let's create a playing to opacity converter. So the trick is that we're going to use the parameter. And we're going to pass the parameter. We're going to pass a value of 1 when we're getting a value for the play button. And we're going to pass a parameter of 0, or null when we're looking at the stop button. So here's the logic. We're going to bind this to isPlaying, right? And so we're looking at isPlaying. If it's true, then this block of code is happening. And if the parameter is not null and the value is 1, that means the play button when we're playing is going to be disabled. And I know we can't just check enabled or disabled in here. We have to use the opacity because this is generic, right? This doesn't know anything about our models. So we're going to return opacity of 0.4, which is going to make it look disabled. Otherwise, if it's the stop button, in other words, the parameter is null, and the value is playing, we're going to return 1.0, full opacity. All right, so when isPlaying is false, the play button is complete opacity, 1.0, and the stop button will be 0.4. So that's that. Now what we need to do is in detail page, right up here, we have to add the line for our playing to opacity converter. And now we can change our stack layout, our horizontal stack layout, to something a little bit more complete. So here's our horizontal stack layout. And notice I'm getting the height request here, and it's just because of the way images are. If we just make this whole stack layout 50 pixels high, then the images will be 50 pixels high and 50 pixels wide. So here's an image, and we've got our source and our isEnabled, which is bound to isPlaying using the inverse bool converter just like before. Now we're using opacity, and we're binding to isPlaying using the playing to opacity converter, and we're sending that with the converter parameter of 1 because that's our play button. Next, look at this, image.gesture recognizers. So gesture recognizers is a way that you can do what the image button does without using an image button. And you just use a tap gesture recognizer. It's in the box. You say number of taps required is 1, and look, command. You just tell it what command you want to execute. So there you go. Now, also notice that here in this image source we have play.png. Here I just said stop. Yeah, that's right. You don't need to actually put .png in there to get the stop image. So here's our 10 pixels of space, and our binding to isEnabled, which is just isPlaying, and the opacity using the playing to opacity converter. And the same tap gesture recognizer there, but this time it's bound to stop. So before we move on, I want to address a couple UI issues. The date published is displayed with the time as well. And the bug is in the string format. So if I come down here to the date published and look at the string format, I'm just going to make this little change, just 0:. And now we won't see 12 midnight after the day. And while we're at it, let's go to the home page and update it there as well. Now let's run it again and see if we get the effect that we wanted. Here we go. That looks right. Now when we play, excellent. And you can see that we just see the date here and here as well without the annoying 12 midnight time. All right, next, we're going to add a pause button. So that's going to start with our detail page view model. I'm going to add a variable here, is paused. Now we need a pause command. So let's go down here somewhere. And yeah, this looks like a good place. We'll add a pause command and perform pause. So remember the pattern. We have our I command. And in that I command, we're returning a new async command that points to perform pause. Perform pause is what happens when somebody clicks the pause button, which calls the pause command. We're going to set is playing to false and is pause to true. And we're going to pause. Now, why is paused equals true? Because if it's paused, when we go to play, we want to change what we call. We want to do a play pause rather than a play. So that means we have to update perform play. Here's perform play. So we are checking is paused, and if we are paused, we're going to call play pause, which plays resuming from where we paused. And if we are not paused, then we're just going to do what we did before. But either way, when we're playing, is paused is going to be false. Now we're ready to add the pause button. So we'll go back to detail page, and this is going to get wedged between the play and stop buttons right here in our horizontal stack layout. So this is all pretty simple. You could have just copied, the stop button up here. The only thing that changes is this right here, binding pause, binding stop, and also the source of the image. So now let's run it and see if the pause works. All right, let's start playing. And pause. And play again. There you go. Now if we stop and we play, it starts over again. So that's pretty good. We're also going to clean up this little business of, time remaining, just pushing everything down when we play. We'll get to that. But now at least we have a pause button. So let's move on to the rewind and fast forward features. Back to the view model. We're going to add rewind and fast forward commands and methods to support them. So here's rewind. Now this is just a regular command. Rewind and fast forward don't require any kind of asynchronous calls. So therefore we're just using a regular command, and the methods will be just void, not async task. We're getting a time span, which is 10 seconds, because we only want to rewind 10 seconds if we have 10 seconds to rewind. If not, we're just going to seek to the start. If the position is greater than 10 seconds, we're going to seek to the position subtracting 10 seconds. Fast forward is kind of the same. Here's our 10 seconds, and the last 10 seconds is the duration, subtract 10 seconds. And if the position is less than that last 10 seconds, we're going to seek to the current position, adding 10 seconds to it. All right, now we're going to go to the detail page, and I'm just going to replace the entire stack layout of buttons. And we'll start at the top. So I've centered this whole stack layout horizontally, just so that they're not all squished over to the left. So here's our rewind button first, then the play button, then the pause button, then the stop button, and then the fast forward button, all using the image with gesture recognizer, the tap gesture recognizer. All right, now let's give it a shot, try it out, see what happens. That looks better, huh? Here's our playing. Now let's go ahead, 10 seconds.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we are weird,
Again.
wasn't it?
It was strange.
Back
I
10
told
seconds.
you knew, but
June 22nd.
So
we've been to Dev Intersection and back.
we have
Pause. Play.
It was.
They all seem to work. Excellent. Let's add that slider bar. Before we can add the slider bar, let's add this property called current position. And this is what we're going to bind the slider controls value property to. So the value property is a double between 0 and 1. By dividing the position's total milliseconds by the duration's total milliseconds, we get the position as a decimal value between 0 and 1. And to set the position, we get the position in milliseconds by multiplying the value by cross-media manager current duration total milliseconds. All right, so now we'll go to the detail XAML and we'll add the slider. And that slider is going to go right after our stack layout. Now, notice that we've set the thumb image source to thumb. That's our thumb image that I showed you earlier. But we're not done yet. We're going to update the position changed event handler to be a little smarter. Back in the view model. Here's position changed. So I don't just want time remaining anymore. I want to set the current status to something that looks like this. 4 minutes and 50 seconds out of 55 minutes and 13 seconds. So it's basically going to show us a current position and the total duration all at once. And I think that's a little bit more in tune with what's going on. So this logic just is setting the string, the current status, to the current media position divided by the duration. Now I've also added this line of code right here, base.onPropertyChanged current position. So what's that all about? If you remember, base view model, which is in MVVM helpers, is really an observable object. So it already has iNotifyPropertyChanged in it. So I'm just calling base.onPropertyChanged and then saying, basically telling Xamarin Forms that, hey, the current position property has changed. Because current position, if you remember, we just wrote this, is bound to the slider's value property. Yeah, another thing that I did here is I changed the hours, whatever the trailing thing here is, to a D1, which is 1 decimal place rather than 2. So rather than the hours being 01, whatever, it's just 1. So there's another tweak that I want to do, and that is on the title. So the title label I'm going to change to, the .NET Rocks podcast client is going to be bold. Text color is going to be black rather than gray. And everything else should be the same. And I'm going to do the same on the detail page. Bold and black, big, that's it. And before we run this, there's one other little change I want to make. I want to get rid of this label that only shows up when we're playing. So take that out, and I want to move it into this horizontal stack layout that has the show number and the date published in it. So essentially, it's not going to be jumping around anymore. All right, let's give it a shot now. All right, so this looks good, right? Nice bold title up here. Play is the only thing enabled. So watch what happens when I play. Playing from cache. Now you can see we've got our status right there. Let's move the slider.
So, rather than a principle that says, when you're in a big hole, stop digging. Or when you're in a two, in terms of what it does, behavior, predictable in terms of how it works, runtime characteristic. So predictable.
So this is coming along nicely. This is where we're going to leave it for today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazertrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.